welcome to today's webinar. I'm really excited about this webinar. I've got a good old friend from Aston Villa, Tom Evans, on the webinar today. How are you, Tom?
Yeah, I'm very good, thanks, Anthony. Good.
Good. So some of you may recognise Tom. He was out, gosh, I think 6 or so years ago, maybe, with Joe Hunt, and done some training with our guys when Aston Villa came out and played in an American tour. So it was great. Two good guys. We've had Joe Hunt on in earlier webinars, so you can always look that up. He's now at Wolverhampton Wanderers, and Tom is still at Aston Villa. So without before we go in and just introduce Tom for those people that don't know him, anybody that's listening in, you should have like a panel on your right hand side. Please ask questions. We won't send them straight away to Tom, but throughout the webinar as they come in. So we'll be asking questions. So we'll see if Tom can answer them to the best of his ability. But for right now, we're getting ready to go. So Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, how you got to where you got to, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks for having me anyway tonight, Anthony. I appreciate you asking me to do this.
Absolutely.
So I started coaching really when I was at university, about the age of 18. I was playing football at a local level, not very good standard. Realised I wasn't ever really going to make anything as a footballer, but enjoyed the sport and also enjoyed the coaching side. So when I was at university, I went on to my level 2 coaching award, and then from there, my degree that I was studying was half business and half sports. Part of my degree course meant having to go on a placement. So I got in contact with my old manager at the time at Aston Villa, Warwick Horton, and he got me in on some work experience. So I did that for a little bit while I was at university. Did the work experience and then joined as a part-time coach with the community scheme. I did that for a couple of years. Graduated university. At the time, there wasn't any roles at Aston Villa going. So then I ended up coaching a local non-league club, and at the same time working for my local council, coaching sports, multi-sports then. I'd had a little bit of that, wanted to do something different, so then went to America to work for Challenger. Spent a couple of summers out with Challenger, which I absolutely loved. I know yourself, Anthony, you were with them as well.
Yeah.
And then I got a phone call from Joe Hunt about some full-time positions coming up at Aston Villa. So then I came back from America and then went to work full-time in the community scheme at Aston Villa. So I spent 4 years then full-time working in the community. Whilst I was doing that, I then started to work within the academies development centres, working with the younger players, the 6s, 7s and 8s. So I did that for a few years, and then I moved within that 4-year period to working with some of the older age groups, from 9s through to 16s. And then the EPPP came around in 2012, and they started to employ more staff full-time in the academy system from that. So a guy called Mark Delaney was employed as the lead foundation phase, so the 9s to 11s. He did that for a year, but then when it came closer to the audit time, we employed more staff, and then I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to work full-time within the academy programme under then academy manager Brian Jones, and Steve Burns was the head of coach and assistant academy manager. So I went into there and then started working within the academy within the foundation phase, whilst also looking after the pre-academy, so the under 6s, under 7s, under 8s programme, whilst coaching the under 11 team. So I did that for a number of years, then led the foundation phase for a couple of seasons before then moving to work within the youth development phase. So that's really where I've got to now, and I'm still working within the youth development phase.
Well, fantastic. So I think just by you reiterating exactly the same thing that we've had for most of our guests here, trying to get into where you want to be, where you want to coach isn't just a job where you can just get it. You have to go through and have luck and a bit of chance as well to go with it. Joe Hunt being obviously one of our friends and obviously a real good friend of yours, getting you into the Villa program. So we're going to start really back at the beginning, and this whole webinar is about the EPPP and really how that has changed the landscape, let's say, of English soccer. We can't say British because it's really much an English program through the FA. So in 2012, the EPP started. What can you give some kind of groundwork and some background for those that are listening on what the EPP stands for, what it means, and what really was the noticeable changes from 1 year to the first year of just EPP and what that meant as an academy?
So I think, like, for myself, I worked on quite a lot of the documentation in order for us to get a Category 1 academy. As part of my role when I was brought in was to produce documentation, show what we do as an academy. So at that time, there would have been 8 to 10 full-time staff within the academy. If you look to now, your Category 1 academies are probably between 35 and 50 full-time staff members. So that's been one of the biggest changes that I've seen happen from that point of view.
And then on those changes, let's talk a little bit about what the staff is. I mean, that's a large. I mean, you're talking quadrupling the number of people that's coming in for staffing. That's not necessarily all coaches. That's going to be for a wide range of disciplines. Can you explain a little bit more what the EPP meant to having that staff increase and what that staff was?
Yeah, so whereas you'd have a couple of coaches who'll be working with the 16s and 18s full time, you're now looking at a staff in terms of coaching that will work from under 9s full-time staff to under 23 full-time staff. So we're in a model now where there's a full-time member of staff at each age group in terms of coaching. Then you have, so a lot of it is talked about the multidisciplinary team. So if I talk about the multidisciplinary team for, say, under 13s, we'll have coaching, we'll have analysis, we'll have sports science and medicine, physiotherapists as well will be there. We have specialist full-time goalkeeper coaches who will work across the phases as well. I know somebody's listening tonight, Mike. He's our goalkeeper coach at Aston Villa, who we're very fortunate to have. So it's the staff for all. Then you have your full-time transport. You'll have for terms of getting players to and from training. You'll have education staff. Recently at Villa, we've just had player welfare, player care staff come in to look after the different side, more holistic development for the program. So it's just getting bigger and bigger all the time.
Well, I know one of the key changes there was making sure that the players that are coming in have to get an education at the same time, so forced education to get a scholarship. So, so the welfare, is that a welfare and education officer? Is that club wide or is that per team? And do you have an education and welfare, or is it just welfare?
Yeah, so within ours we have 3. So we have a head of education, then we have an assistant education officer, and then we have the head of player care. So the 3 of them there will be involved with that. There is a wider player care and safeguarding across the club, but we have 3 people specifically for the academy teams from 9s through to 23s.
Gotcha. Now on the EPPP, I'll just call it the EPPP for those that are listening, but it's the performance player pathway, is elite player performance pathway for those that aren't familiar on this side of the pond of what that means. So when you had the EPP come around, when it first made the changes, was there the categories? Was there the different categories in clubs, or was it pretty much, hey, we're rolling this out and let's see what it can develop into over that period of time? Because of course now we've got categories, which we'll go into in just a second.
Yeah, so when it first came around, there was always going to be the categories which you would apply for to go into. So from category 1, 2, 3 into category 4. And obviously with the Premier League's aim of producing better homegrown players. So when you first wanted to apply on the very first bit in 2012, you had to state which category you wanted to go to. Now that also involved the club putting in a percentage of money. So if you wanted to be category 1, the more money the club put in at the start, that would then be fund matched by the Premier League. So that was a big thing, along with facilities though, and also a staffing structure. So that sort of where clubs were able to pitch at what category they wanted to be, but then it was an audit process to see if actually you could provide what you were saying you were providing.
Right. So with that, the different categories, money is obviously a Liverpool, a Villa, well, maybe, you know, those Premier League clubs, they're going to be category 1 just because of the money they can put in. And you say in the early days, it was for $1 million in, you get $1 million back. We're just giving numbers, right? It was a straight 1-for-1. Is that what it was, or?
Yeah, I believe it was back then for what you would put in. But obviously clubs would put more in, but the Premier League would go up to about 1.2 million, whatever they were going to go and put in. And
so up to a certain amount of money is what the Premier League would then match with what they were budgeting for them for homegrown players.
Yeah.
Okay. So really overnight you went from 2 to 3, maybe 4 coaches to the full-blown hierarchy of each team, and these kids being treated like really mini professionals, right?
Yeah, I think at Aston Villa it's been slightly different. We didn't go as big as quick. Some of the other clubs I know did. We were 2 full-time staff in the foundation phase, 2 full-time staff in the youth development phase, and then there was the full-time staff in the under-18s and reserve team as it was then, before it turned into under-23s.
Which is what it is now, the under-23s. The Scottish followed somewhat the same pattern as well. So
yeah.
You can also put some injured players that are coming back into that under-23s as well. You're allowed. So how many players are you allowed over 23 in the under-23s?
Not sure what they allow in the Premier League. Probably, I think it's something to do with first team players in what they can have in there, coming back and over the age. I think there's a couple, 2 or 3 that you can have, maybe more. It depends on where they're at, really. It's a big push from the Premier League is to promote Premier League 2, and bridging that gap from youth team football to getting into the first team. And it's I think that's the biggest challenging area, I think, for the Premier League is Premier League 2 and where players go, or do they go out on loan?
So these are only opinions, but how long has Premier League 2 been in now since they abolished the reserve teams?
How long what, sorry?
How long has Premier League 2 been in? How many years has Premier League 2 been in since they abolished the reserve team?
It's been in now for a number of years, for 5, 6 years, in terms of its rebranding as Premier League 2, because they want to make it exciting, draw more attention, because there's a lot of players playing in it. But I think if you were playing a lot of games in Premier League 2 but not going out and playing more competitive style football, I think some of those players maybe stagnate a little bit, and it's getting that opportunity for them to play first team football, which can be difficult at any club.
So on the I've listened to a couple of boys, Stuart up at Blackburn Rovers. So Blackburn Rovers are in the Championship division. They're an ex-Premier League club. They're category 1 as well, so they would be a type of team that you'd end up playing. He was given a presentation, so they're investing about $3 million into the academy program, £3 million. So that would be about $4.5 million for the American listeners here. The investment that's put in is incredible. What do you think that investment provides for A, the academy, B, you as coaches, and C as the club?
The investment is the main thing, really, because if you don't have the funding going in, then it can't run. I think something last week or the week before in the US, am I right in saying about the US soccer providing money they've ended it?
Yes, 60 million in debt, so that's gone.
So obviously the impact it would have there on the clubs being able to run their academies, if that happened here, you'd be looking at clubs to self-fund it as well. So it does help in terms of what the league put in, but also the clubs themselves. It's the whole infrastructure. So if at Aston Villa we're putting in X amount of money, but you're another club maybe near the top of the Premier League, for example, or you've got a worldwide fan base, you could be spending way above what Aston Villa could maybe be spending on their academy or choose to spend. It's also what you choose to spend on it. Some clubs may want to pay more into their academy than first teams. It's down to preference and stuff, what the owners want.
Well, I think that leads me nicely into the question. So I've spoken to other people in academies, and I've got a kind of a mission statement from them of what they feel the academy is, including Getafe in Spain as well. And so what would be the overall projection? What's the overall goal within the academy in a club setting?
So if you look at ours, it will be to get players in our first team. If we can't get them in our first team and have the best players in our region, it would be then for them to go and play professional football elsewhere. Some academies will use the strapline that they're the best educational academy. You may not play in their first team, but they'll guarantee you'll play in another first team in the world, in the top leagues. So it all depends on where you're at. So if you're a Chelsea, okay, until recently, until the ban when they had that, you may not have got in at Chelsea's first team, but they would get their pitch to go and play for Chelsea Academy over another club that does have a direct pathway into a first team. Is we're a finishing school, so we're a Harvard, we're an Oxford, we're Cambridge universities. We'll polish your education off, ready for you to go and play in a first team somewhere else if you can't get into our first team, because they're spending multi-million pounds for the top talent in the world at the time who can go in and do it straight away. Obviously, they're a little bit different now at Chelsea because of the situation they found themselves in, but I think it's been a bit of a win-win for them now because they've got so many good young British talent coming through into that first team. Either way, I think it gives them a real bright future.
I was lucky enough to see Billy Gilmore up in Rangers all those years. Well, not that many years ago, 3 years ago or whatever. I got to watch him train and got to, and then now of course he's broken into the first team at Chelsea. So I'm not sure if the ban came in. You can speculate. I think he, obviously he'd make his own destiny, but again, going into that academy and with the situations you just said, gave him that opportunity to break in. So it's very interesting how you say that, because one of the questions I ask when anybody's into the academy programs, Getafe, they have no interest in bringing any of those players really into the first team. I don't say interest, but it's very unlikely they'll get in there because they feel they're not at 17, 18 years old. They're just not ready for that. So they'd much rather loan them, sell them out, and then if they have to, repurchase them. And to be fair, there's been much in the tabloids, especially in the UK over the years, with Pogba, De Bruyne, all were in academies in the UK or in England really, were sold and then later purchased back at a much higher price back into the club. So you can see that model can and does work for some of those clubs. It just I guess for me, the investment that it takes, and in a dollar amount or a pound amount in a currency value, what is the value of that player coming through, then loaning them or selling them worth 2 to 3 years later? What was Pogba, 5 years later, maybe bringing him back in for 100 and something, million pounds. I'm pretty sure you're not putting into the academy 100 and something million pounds. But again, if you had a crystal ball, I guess it would save a lot of time and effort, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we had a player, Gary Cahill, who was at Aston Villa, was in and around the first team. They felt they probably had players ahead of him at the time, so he went to Bolton, spends a year or so at Bolton, and then goes on to a £30 million move to Chelsea as a centre-back. It's that crystal ball, if you know and if you could. And you probably said it all earlier, though, Anthony, when you mentioned about getting a job within the academy. There's a bit of luck as well and fortune and that at the time. And the hard work that you put in to try and achieve that. It's probably similar to a player. If we all knew who the players were going to be and who the main stars were, it'd be easy, really, and you wouldn't really have much of a job to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, upon saying that, everything we've been hearing so far in the short time that we've been talking so far and about the early stage of the EPP, the key thing here is what changes did that model come in for the coaching? Because without the coaching and the quality there and the improvement, the kids aren't going to get much further anyway. So you brought in a lot of staff, but with that, what did it mean for the coaching and what did it mean for people like yourself that were in that program?
I think there's been a bigger push in the UK to make it classed as a profession, such as teaching. It doesn't carry that weight, and it's a profession in that way. It's become so much more professional in terms of the courses that now take place. So they were broken down. Instead of just doing your level 2, your UEFA-B and your A license, there was then age-specific courses because of the players that you're working with. So it increased, I think, the professionalism levels and the standards of coaches and driving. And even now, newer coaches that are coming into it, the technology side of it. They're so good on the technology side, able to show and coach players not just on the pitch but off the pitch as well, and going from there as well with your analysts.
Right, and then obviously working together, I guess every is sessions all recorded, or is it just games that are recorded? Then the analysts will take it and break it down for you, bring it back to the coaching staff for them to be able to, I guess, complete the coaching process.
Yeah, and that would also depend on what your club philosophy is. At the older age groups, you may choose to film every session, but I think it'll be what you're going to use it for. Because if you're just going to go and film a session but never look at it, and as you say, film the learning process, the cycle, then it's just a waste of the cameraman, the analyst time going out and presenting. I think one of the analysts who used to work with me at Villa's probably watching tonight, Matt. He's like one of the best analysts I've had, but there's no point Matt being out at training, watching a session, or filming a session, and I never use any of the footage, or the players don't use the footage. So if you're going to go and film a session, then use it, I would say, or the players use it. Some of them, the analysts now, at some clubs, they don't need to actually step foot out onto the grass. They've got the cameras all ready to show the training. They can sit in an office and control it, and don't get any fresh air. So
how times have changed.
Side, yeah, the analysis side's taken off, and they want drones to fly above your training and loads of different things, really. But you've got to utilize it and have a purpose for it. So is it going to inform training? Is it going to inform players' learning objectives? Is it going to inform what you're going to go and do on a weekend, on a game day? And then likewise, what you take from the game.
I guess that the saying, if it doesn't make the player better, then why do it?
Yeah.
You've got to work on those aspects. So why don't you give an idea to some of our coaches what you would utilize any type of game footage for, or for training purposes, or training footage? What would you primarily look to see out of that for your own game, for your players?
In terms of under 13s, we would link that back to the theme that we would be working on. So if we're working on playing out from the back, for example, and then we film the game and we'd want to see, okay, have we been able to achieve it? Was there examples of maybe a fullback rotating inside and the wide player coming down the line, and using it as a tool for players to see when they've been successful or when they haven't been successful at trying to achieve it, but actually what might have caused the reason for them not being successful. So to analyse it that way, it wouldn't be at the younger ages at 13 in picking out on people going, you didn't mark, you didn't get tight, or you gave a pass away here. It's not a tool to ridicule the player and make them feel so. It's about more the development in the younger groups of showing them how their learning is taking place, what we're trying to do. So if we're using best clip examples, so if the analysts have provided that, or we've as coaches have gone and found the clips, we might show them what it looks like in a first team environment, but we also are realistic that it won't look like that in an under 13 environment. And it's just giving them stepping stones and ideas. So for us, the 13s wise and the youth development phase, analysis is a powerful tool that can be used, and especially in a time like this now, when we actually can't get onto the grass or see the players. There's lots of opportunity to help player development still from that. And I think there's more and more players you talk to now don't watch football as younger ones. You say, oh, did you see that? Oh, I didn't really watch it. They'll play a lot of FIFA and play themselves. But actually, if you say, did you watch a game? There's less and less for me that are actually watching it.
Yeah, and I think that can be detrimental. But I think that as time moves on, there's so many other things to keep kids' attention span, I guess. An hour and a half might be just too long. So you're talking then about the players' performances and what you were looking at and the themes of training for the coaches and how they implemented that into games. The individual learning plan, is that how do you? Is obviously something you implement. I hope I haven't, said something different to what you were doing there. But with all the players that you got inside, what type runs through like an individual learning plan and evaluation scenario for you guys? So I'm guessing through cycles you would look to evaluate and give guidance. But can you give us a little bit more?
So in terms of actually identifying the player's individual learning plan, we'll have a meeting as a multidisciplinary team. So it's not just an individual learning plan on coaching, technical and tactical points. There'll be physical, psychological, social, as well in there, strength and conditioning. There's all the different bits, but in terms of the technical, tactical bit, what we've done over a number of years is we'll have player profiles. So what we profile as a fullback, for example, and if you're going into the youth development phase, you might start getting players that are more predominantly defenders. So they might have a fullback. So we would look at a number 2 and go, okay, so what's he got to be good at? So 1v1 defending. So if I'm coaching an under 12 or a 13 and I've got to pick what his objective may be, I'd look at the profile. I'll go, right, okay, 1v1 defending is an area for development. But on the flip side, it may be that 1v1 is very good at, and I'm still going to give it you as a learning objective because we're going to make it your super strength. So it's not always finding the weakness. You might actually want to develop their strength even further. So if, for example, you took David Beckham at free kicks, okay, well, you might actually still want to give him a plan of developing his free kicks so he becomes even better at it. And whilst you're starting to bring up the other attributes of his game as well, instead of just going, oh, we're going to pick that his free kicks on his left foot aren't very good, for example. So it's left, you're just trying to enhance the super strength at times, as well as other times you might be, okay, it needs to work on marking inside the penalty area. So that may feel part of their plan when you select that. With us, we've worked on that as a 6-week process. So the players would focus on that for 6 weeks. They'd also be given access to footage of them playing in games where they can pick clips of themselves, maybe trying to do their learning objectives. So say, for example, if it's 1v1 defending and you're a fullback, your clips will be there. The biggest thing that we're trying to ask, though, for players, though, is what's the context in the clip? Because it's okay them selecting a 30-second clip of them defending 1v1, but actually what's the context of it, who they're playing against, and the time of the game, and actually the prolongs. Because I think what you could end up with is a player walking in on the review in 6 weeks and going, I'm brilliant at 1v1 defending, I'm the next best player to come out of a British academy, but actually it's the rest of the game as well. You're still trying to develop all of their game, but there's certain areas you might just focus on, be it an area of development or that they're not so strong at, or it's an area that you want to make really, really good and make it their super strength. And then we'd review that. We have to do from the Premier League 4 reviews a season. So you'll do 2 with the parents and the player, and then 2 with the player. And those ones that we've done recently is the player presenting back to us. So we're trying to give the players more ownership over their individual learning plans as well. And we'll get a variety of ways in which players will present back in a review. Some will do it as a drawing. Some will do a PowerPoint presentation with video clips, and others will sit there and talk you through it. And they've got a good memory recollection of when it happened, and they'll talk you through it as well. So there's all different ways for them to review it for us.
Okay, that's good to know. So you don't have a certain way of them reviewing it. You're allowing them the freedom, the creativity to use what they're best at, and that also helps them obviously with their outside skills as well. So outside of the soccer. Now on the individual learning plans, Tom, what you just mentioned earlier about it's getting harder and harder for some of the kids just to go and watch a game. Yes, they'll play lots of game, but on an individual basis, have you found any problems with them training outside of your environment on their own, or trying to follow a learning pathway or a learning plan that requires them to get better as an individual?
Do you mean in terms of players going elsewhere, or what we give them?
Just being at home, just not in your environment, just going home and doing what they need to do there.
I think in terms of academy football now in the UK, the time they spend at the academy is becoming more and more. So they're doing between 12 and 16 hours a week within the youth development phase. So actually when they're away from the club, there's not a massive amount of homework for them to be doing as such, because we're conscious they've also got important years at school that they've got to be doing. We also want them to be human beings and socialise with family and friends. There's not a great amount of homework tasks that we would set them to go away with. There will be some players, which is why I probably asked the question, who may go and get extra one-to-one individual coaching with a coach who's offering that. That's their choice. We would hope, though, that as a club and a Category 1 academy, we're providing all the training and the right levels that is enough for them, and also maybe offering a little bit extra. So we've had a player recently who's going to go and pay X amount of money for somebody else to help them develop something, but we're like, no, but you're getting that here. You don't need to go and spend that much money for a private coach. But I think it'll be down to individual preference. If they feel that they're doing everything they can and the opportunities to try and help them succeed, they'll go and do it. We just have to warn to them about overuse injuries, doing too much, burnout. And the last thing we want from any player is to fall out of love with the game, because they're being pushed too hard and it's just football becomes a chore. We don't want it to be a chore. Now, if you look at some players now are entering academy systems at the age of 6. So they'll be due a testimonial before they can even get a scholarship. So they'll be within an academy for 10 years. And it's a very long job interview in trying to get to the next stage as such. So I think it's key that we don't overload them as well.
But I also think with the new system coming in there, especially when I was back in the UK when it wasn't around, I think kids have got the best tools in front of them now to become a good player and to make that career if that's what their minds are set on. So I guess what I was really trying to say on the individual training there's all individual needs that are needed through the ILP or whatever. Is there areas or there time set aside within the academy program where there's just individual needed training as opposed to team, small groups, etc.?
Yeah, so it will work on that focus. If I went through an under-13s week for you, for example, so on a Tuesday evening we would train as a group. If there was the need for a player to come out of that group and on their individual learning plan, it may be to do some extra athletic development. I know Mike with the goalkeepers, he's built in extra time where a goalkeeper will go and do some extra strength and conditioning because it's what they need at that point. So the under-13s we would train as a group on a Tuesday evening between 2 hours. That's activation, warm-ups through the session. Then on a Wednesday we'll do a day release, so they come out of school. Because we don't want them to miss a great amount of school, they end up coming into the club at 3 o'clock to train until 7. We have an hour-and-a-half session from 3 till 4:30. The bit from just after 4 o'clock till 4:30 before they have to go and do education is all individual time. So the players will break off. Now, individual time may mean working in a group of 4, but their focus is purely on their individual learning objectives. So as the coach, you would set up a practice that allows them to get exposure, a lot of exposure to that part of their plan that they're trying to work on. So if I go back to the fullback, having to work on 1v1 defending, building a plan where he might play against a wide player who's working on dribbling and crossing or running with the ball, and they would be paired up together. So they're both getting individual time and they can work on their objective. We've also just implemented a new position-specific program, which again, it may be a group of 4 or 5 players, but their focus and actually the concentration just on them is so powerful. And I think that's the biggest part that I see players feeding back on positive, is that more individual focus and attention on them. That's what they want. They're preferring that more and more. And even that 20-minute slot we have on a Wednesday for the under-13s, and you'll ask them what were the positives, they love that bit.
Fantastic. We do have a question from Mike, but before I ask that question, I'm going to ask one more to you that should tie into that question. So you've been talking about the youth development phase, and again, I want to make sure there's a lot of people over here that are listening to this that are unfamiliar with what some of the titles are. So why don't you give kind of an overview of your foundation phase, and then your youth development phase, and then the professional development phase. But why don't you just go through what expectations for that kid and what type of development is in that period before they graduate to the next period, and then of course into the next period.
So your foundation phase is obviously players from your under 9s to your under 11s. Some clubs will incorporate their under 12s into the foundation phase, but less and less are doing that. So under 9 to under 11 in British academies is a 1-year registration. What we've done historically at Aston Villa is the under 9, 10 and under 11 season. It's extremely rare for us not to retain a player and register them for the next season. We tend to give them that 3-year window as much as we can to allow them to develop, because it goes back to your point earlier of a crystal ball. We then will have markers that we would expect a player to be able to achieve, and technical more coming out of the foundation phase, not tactical. There will be some kind of game understanding in there, because if they're all technically great but don't actually have any idea in terms, so if they can keep the ball up 5,000 times but then can't go and produce anything within a game, yeah, that may be a point. So we'll have markers that we'll be looking at for players. Now, it won't be strict in terms of, if you're a central midfield player, you must be able to pass the ball with both feet over X amount of distance. It will be based on the player, really, because they're all individuals. They'll all have different strengths and capabilities. So then they'll move into the youth development phase, so under 12s through to under 16s. When if you think about that in terms of their life, it's a massive change. So over here, they may have just left their primary school and they're going to go and move into a bigger senior school. So they have that to contemplate, and they move into their under 12 year. Now their under 12 year is another 1-year registration, where again, they're having massive changes in their lives. So we like to think that we've made the right retained decisions at the age of under 11s. So that under 12s is a year of bedding in and starting to introduce 11-a-side football within the academy structure. Some clubs are still playing 9-a-side at under 12s. Historically, we've moved to 11-a-side at under 12s, where there might be some festivals in which you might play 9-a-side or 6-a-side football, but predominantly it's that. After your under 12 year, we're looking at, again, what's their technical capabilities. You're also starting to have a look at physical capabilities as well. Are they going to be able to meet what you see the physical demands of the game as it progresses? Can they get around the pitch? That doesn't mean that they can be all athlete and no footballer. And likewise, it will be time, because, as I mentioned a second ago, it's their biggest changing phase in their life. They're going to grow, they go through puberty, hormones and everything like that. And at the same time, you're trying to predict, actually, are they going to be a footballer? So I would say there's probably a little bit more patience in those 13s, 14 years, which is why it's a 2-year registration. So after a player's done 4 1-year registrations, they then get a 2-year registration in their under 13, 14 years, because it's where the majority of players will go through a lot of growth in that time period before moving into, again, 15, 16s, another 2-year registration period before a decision's made over whether they'll become a full-time footballer at the club on a scholarship. So each year you'll be looking at different things and your criteria of the club, what you see in a player when they get into that 15, 16. They're more or likely, you would say 80% of the players, you'll have a good idea on their best position. Some will move. I was listening to a John Terry interview the other day, and he was talking about being in the youth team at Chelsea as a central midfield player. Get an injury, Ted Dale then moves him as a centre back, and then obviously he goes on and has the career he has. So there's always movement like that.
Definitely. And then the professional development phase?
So then your professional phase, so under 18s and under 23s. It was under 21s and expanded to under 23s. A scholarship, so you can have a standard scholarship of 2 years, which is funded as well by the Premier League, and these players will earn money while they're doing that. It's a set amount of money up to the age of 17, then they can access a professional contract where they might be paid more money. And then if they're successful on that, they might get a professional contract. You may sign a player and give him a scholarship and a professional contract. which might kick in. So they may get a 2-year scholarship and a 1-year professional contract. Some may get more depending on what you perceive their potential ability is.
And what would be the number of scholarships, I guess, in that professional development phase? Because with the big age range there, it allows obviously to really invest the money, I guess, in the players that you think are going to really have the best opportunity to make it.
Yeah, there are sets. There's set amount, I believe it's 15 that the Premier League or the EFL or fund towards. So then you could end up with 30 within your like under 17s, under 18s, or there'll be one team that will play on a Saturday and you're under 18s. But then as a club, you may choose to pay some, when they get to a 17th, you may pay them more money. And that can also be down to actually getting a player to sign for your club as well. So you could develop a player up to the age of 16 and then another club can come in. We had a boy who went to Arsenal after being at the club from under 9s and he left at 16 to go to Arsenal. Players move now also at younger ages between clubs across all the categories. It's not just category 1 taking from category 1 or category 2. You'll get 2s taking from 3s and players move in that way as well.
Now you just moved into one of the areas there before I come back to Mikey again, was the boy that moved from you guys in the Midlands to London, which was that 5 hours, 4 hours?
No, it's only 2 hours.
2 hours?
2 hours.
Maybe I'm thinking of Manchester and Liverpool, but yeah.
Yeah.
So I've been home for a while, but there is a certain within the EPPP, there is a certain range, catchment area, if you like, of where you can get your players to a certain age, and then after a certain age, you're free to go from across the nation. And well, I guess I don't know how that's another question, I guess, in a minute, is how the European Union is going to look and getting players from in Europe. But I get, what age are you limited to within your catchment area, and how big is that catchment area of where you pick your players?
So within the foundation phase, you've got an hour's radius of your training centre and where you can go and recruit players from. When you move into the youth development phase, it can extend to an hour and a half. But that can be different though if you're prepared to move the player under 12s and into the 13s into a full-time education program. So I know of players that were at another club and left that club and went up to Everton at the age of 11 and leaves the family and goes and lives with a host family. So you can then recruit nationally for players as long as you're prepared to go and move them. There's a player who we'd had a look at one point. He was in a club just outside of London, came out of the club, ended up going to a club right on the east coast of the UK, didn't quite settle there, left that club, then went to a club in the northwest. So these are all out of the hour and a half travelling zones, but because he moved on full-time training educational models and schools as such, he could move there. He then left the club in the northwest and is now playing for a club in the south of London. So, wow. And he'll be an under 15 next year. So he's had a lot of travelling from there. So I think there are ways in which you can recruit nationally as long as you have the full-time training models and education in place.
I guess that brings me to Mikey's question, because with all of that travel and maybe taking players, and you have to have host families, and there's a lot of costs involved in staff in that. So here's the one from Mike. He said, you speak about a big expansion of staff within the EPPP system, the EPPP system. How did the added staff members and departments aid your personal development as a lead coach?
The biggest thing for me, so I've just done a course, a Premier League. So part of, you asked earlier about coach development and how it's helped with coaching. So the Premier League have also put on their own coaching. So I did a course called ECAS. So it's a lead coach apprenticeship scheme. The Premier League pay for it all. It's a recognised education qualification. And the biggest part on that was actually utilising, understanding what you've got in the multidisciplinary team. So as Mike mentions there about how they aided personal development, is you get to draw off all their experiences. So there's no way in terms of me being able to take clips from a game without me having sat with Matt in the past and learn, and just seeing how to do that, code windows, it challenges you to do that. I'm not great at it, but I have an understanding. In terms of the physical parts, that isn't my strength in terms of the sports science, but I get to see what these coaches are doing. Now, you have to be careful that sports science sometimes don't run away with it and want to take its places, and it becomes more sports science based than football based, but there has to be that balance. So it's major for me, learning all the different aspects of the sport, whereas going back to pre-EPPP, going pre that, you'd have your 18s coach, a physio, and maybe a goalkeeper coach, and it would be coach dominated. Whereas now you've got the whole multidisciplinary team all bringing on their expertise, and that's what they are experts in their fields. So if you're a coach and you don't take on their information, their input, so like as the goalkeeping, I think it's massive that you also utilize your goalkeeper coaches within a session. It isn't just stand there and talk to the goalkeeper, but actually if you're doing a playing out from the back, work with the defenders as well, or if it's working with midfielders rotating in, not just standing with a goalkeeper talking about what they talk about really. So for my own personal development, it's holistic. I've got so much more understanding now on the sports science side, why we test players, how we test them, what the loading requirements are. So I was fortunate for a couple of seasons to work with the 18s and learn from there and see the level of detail there. And there's at our club a very good sports scientist there. And that detail, it just helps your own knowledge and probably gives you a bit more confidence as a coach as well, but also feeling comfortable enough to question why something's taking place and that person not saying that as a threat, because it is, I'm probably asking why, because I probably don't understand myself, and trying to get that relationship with the wider staff in your club.
Now, I'd imagine with following on from Mikey there on the explosion of the staff, if that's the right word to use, full time is key. I think I can obviously cast my mind back to when I was in the UK working. It wasn't always full time. There was very few full time jobs available, so you're having to work to get cash to pay your rent and your car and everything else. You weren't getting enough hours at the club. Now, I guess with the professionalism and the full timeness of the coaches, that's obviously helping in CPDs and other things. Is that something as a lead coach that you are part and parcel of helping your coaches underneath you to be able to improve themselves, and you run some CPDs, or is that something on the club side? Or what do you do for the coaches development within the club as opposed to external like the FA?
Yeah, so at the very start, we'd be slightly involved in that process of the CPD for the other staff, whether it's putting on a coaching session and say what we're trying to look for, be that with the part-time staff or the multidisciplinary team. We've moved more towards now where you have a head of coaching at the club, which is part funded by the Premier League, and that will be their responsibility to provide CPD, whether it's a coaching one or it's a multidisciplinary one, where it's not just the coaching staff on it. You may have the recruitment staff involved in those meetings, or sports science in what you're trying to look for. But for myself, in terms of if I'm working with a part-time member of staff, we're moving towards a new model, which I quite like, where you've got a filter coach and a momentum coach. So if I'm the momentum coach in the game, I'm probably the one you hear the most. Whereas the filter coach will be a little bit detached from the game, watching the game, but also talking to the players that aren't on the side, but ensuring that the momentum coach is sticking to the plan that you've set out for the game that week. So if your main focus for that week is playing out from the back and linking to midfield, if myself as the momentum coach I keep focusing on the attacking third, the other coach should be able to pull me out and go, make sure you're doing this. Because we flip that role, so it isn't just the full-time member of staff that does that every game or every week. If swaps, we both have an opportunity to check and challenge each other, but also make sure that the plan's right. So there's giving that part-time member of staff, they're not there to be bibs, ballers and cones. They're there to coach and to be part of it, but also to develop them, because hopefully one day they'll become a full-time member of staff if they choose to. There will be part-time members of staff who have another full-time day job which they absolutely love, and where in the coaching sides, their hobby as such, their passion. Yeah, okay, they may get paid for it, but they may have a job that they don't want to work full time in football, and everything like that. So it's just giving opportunities for their development as well.
Fantastic. So we're obviously been going close to an hour now, and I really don't like going over because I know how valuable your time is. I've got a couple of more questions, and for those people that are listening, please feel free. We just got one from Matt, which we'll give to Tom in just a second. But please feel free to start writing some questions out, and we'll get them to Tom and see if he can answer them to the best of his ability. But so with the EPPP system coming in, there has been, in my opinion, I mean, looking from the outside, I've been back a couple of times. Obviously, the England international teams in the lower youth age groups have been remarkably better. In fact, winning a World Cup in one, the Youth World Cup in one instance. With the situation Chelsea found themselves into and forced their hand into what they're doing, do you feel then that the EPPP is really now starting to make clubs think, you know what, we could probably pull a lot more younger players coming through because of the experience they've got, the interaction they've got, more exposure to probably Premier League players, Premier League experiences, and being treated like a professional player from younger age groups? Do you feel that would eventually, I mean, we're still, 8 years into this? And in soccer, we class it as a season. It's difficult to break it down month by month like a regular business. Do you feel this is developing into something that could really become a world beater and maintain the Premier League status?
Yeah, I think definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think you'll always get your outliers, your top players who will go on and do great things as long as they've got the right environment. I think you're developing and increasing the other standard of the game as well. So if you've got your top players, but then the players around them, you're improving that level as well. So you're raising that. I think within obviously you mentioned Chelsea a little bit there, it's opportunity. What opportunity are they going to get? Hopefully clubs will start to look at it. Even you look at Liverpool now with their team, there's a lot of younger players around it as well who were getting in there. Trent Alexander-Arnold, Robertson, people like that. And you're starting to feel it. But also you're seeing a lot of European clubs now trying to sign young British players. So obviously there's Sancho at Dortmund, and you look at a couple of others that are moving abroad, maybe to get opportunity because they're going to get it sooner. If you are a British club, it's being able to plan the players' pathway in their journey, that they don't need to go abroad for a permanent move. They may go on loan, which Chelsea have done well over the years, and they pick their loans for where players are going to go, and then they come back when they're ready and go from there. So I think if you can plan that. But the more it goes on, and the Premier League will talk about homegrown debuts, you make your homegrown debut now, you get a nice ball in the case. As the EPPP and this process goes on, nearly the majority of players will have come through the EPPP. So it'll be in 20 years' time, if the EPPP is still going, those players will have all been in an EPPP program, be it a Category 4 or to Category 1. They'll have come through that because that's the development of what's happening. That's the program that's available in this country. I do think it's having a really good positive impact on them. And I always remember when I started at Aston Villa full-time, Steve Burns, he says you need to give the player every opportunity to succeed. Because at the time, people go, oh, you give them so much. And I said that to him one day. I said, Steve, why do we give them this, this, and this? And he went, because you want to give them every opportunity to succeed. And to that there, if they don't, and they've got a ceiling, fine. But then we know we've done everything in our capability, what we're capable of doing, of giving them that chance. And then obviously the other bits are there.
Absolutely, and of course that's a lot down to the individual as well, and their work ethic and their psychological makeup and their commitment to work ethic and lifestyle. I would say, I think I've had plenty of chat with obviously my parents being in this sport. Everybody thinks they're a coach, right? But I think with the quality of the players that are coming into the Premier League, if I was a player coming through young now, you have to think that much harder. If you really want to be a player, you've got to try and beat out some of these top teams. I think that can improve naturally those people that want to move on further as well, which makes us again in the Premier League. If you do get into the Premier League, or even some of the other big leagues, your La Liga, your Bundesliga, you are going to be that much more improved, better, more forward-rounded player because you've got a lot of good players to beat out. So I think it's done a good job there. So Matt has a question for you, Tom, and I apologize about this, Matt. I've seen it come through, but it's actually, we're going to go back a little bit, Tom, okay? So Tom, with the momentum coach and the filter coach, how does that work with a match and the team talk?
So the way in which we've implemented that so far is we'll set out, so we'll have a set of roles and responsibilities, if you like. So far what we've done is we've decided to do it in periods. So we'll play 3 periods in a game, 3 25-minute periods. So if I'm the filter coach for the game, my role at the start of the day is to do the team talk for the players. So as the filter, because I'm going to be the one who's attached and stood back, I will then do the team talks in the breaks. Because the idea of the momentum coach being in the game, they may miss some things. They're emotionally really connected to the game. Yeah, as the filter coach, you are still emotionally attached, but you're just a couple of yards back and you're not having to worry about so much shouting. Now you can both shout on or give on praise to players, but as the filter coach, I won't be coaching every little bit of the game, or where it might be I'm just standing back. I'll be doing tasks to the players that aren't playing, so I'll be asking them questions. So what do they see about the opposition? What formation do they play? Any key players that they might feel that could have an impact on the game? How we've started in our play. So I'll be doing that as well as whilst being a filter coach. Then comes to the period, the half time, momentum coach will take a step back and I'll talk through what I've seen as the game plan of what we set at the start of the day. Then because we're new to this, I'll then take the role as the momentum coach in the next period. And the momentum coach on the first period will step back and become the filter coach. So it gives them a little bit of breathing space from the game and it allows them to look at what's happening as well. And they will do the next team talk. End of the game, the debrief would go down to your filter coach again. They would lead that because they've put up the game plan before. So the in possession, out of possession, working through the thirds of the pitch. And we would talk about that and debrief with the players. Now that debrief with the players, it may be that we do it in units. So the momentum coach might take a unit and the filter coach will take a unit. Or we could get players to feed back in. If we've travelled to an away game on the coach, then we might get time to talk to individuals after the game also. And we'll devise that up. But it's a new concept and way for me, and I've really enjoyed it so far, and I've enjoyed both parts of it. Sometimes I think as the filter coach, you can feel like there's that perception, if there's a senior management watching, oh, he's not doing anything today. Or the parents on the other side going, well, why isn't he saying anything today as the coach? So we've had to go through a process of explaining it to what we're doing and why we're doing it. So there's understanding, so they don't go, oh, Tom's not saying anything today. Why is that? Is he in a or something like that? But actually, I am worried. It's away from there.
I mean, I like it. I mean, one thing I say to Tom, I told you before, this is like my 17th one of doing the things that we're picking up off different clubs that I think would improve what we're trying to do out here and pass on to our kids and our coaches. That would be one of the things that I would take for sure from this. I think that's a tremendous idea. But you also pulled up one of the things that could be a problem from that, and that's the parents, not seeing you do possibly your job. Now, the evaluation after your game, like the coaching process. So you've had the game, you've done the game, the announcing the evaluation with the players and with yourselves. Is that something that will come about directly after the game, a day after the game? Does it not? Do the players even have to evaluate themselves after that particular game, or is it just after performance indicators and practices and maybe a bit of games?
Yeah, so after a game, we'll have a debrief within the changing rooms anyway on the whole game plan. Players are then asked to go onto their online system, so they all have access to an online system to review their performance. Now, we ask them to review it against their individual learning objective. Now, they can make other comments, but the comments we don't really want them to be making are, we don't want them to commentate back on the game, if that makes example. So
be more detailed upon their
yeah, we want it to be more detail driven and not just tough game today, we played well, scored one. That isn't the detail that we want them to reflect on. It's how they did against their objectives. They might pick out, which goes back to your analysis. So the game's coded and each player's got their clips, or they go on and they can write a time frame down of where they did something that they were pleased with, or an area that they might think that they can develop. That'll be part of the reflection and feeding back to there. And touching on your bit about the parents and the problem with filter momentum, that's just down to the education and the workshops you do with your parents to explain why you're doing it, and then they understand it. But also to the players, because we were new at implementing this year and it was new for me, I had more open chats about that with the players, and I put the roles and responsibilities that we had saw within those two roles on the wall for the players. I mean, lads, we need you to look at it, pick it apart. Do you want us to be like that? Do you want the same person to be the filter coach for the whole game, or the momentum coach for the whole game? And then it's reflecting with the players as well, because it has to benefit them as well. It can't just be, oh, it's making me a better coach, but it's not helping the players. It has to help the players in whatever you're doing.
Again, that comes back down to, is what you're doing helping? Is it making players better? So I like it. I like it a lot. So talk about the parents there and the education. Just and we'll wrap up in a minute, Tom. I don't want to take you away from your family, but we call it over here the soccer triad, or the Storm FC triad, because of course our club there, we got the parent, the player in the middle, but everything's interconnected. The club, the coach, the parent, and the player are all interconnected to make sure that the development process and the communication process, and just making sure we do our due diligence. Is there other things? Of course, you did that education program there. By sounds of it, you have a bunch of workshops. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how they fit into the EPPP and how they fit into the club, and really how there's that connection to maintain, you don't get these parents wanting to go look for other clubs, but stay within what you're selling them and what you're developing for?
Which I think goes back right to the start of the introduction of the EPPP, that it's allowed for more parent workshops. Originally within academies or centres of excellence, it was player one side, club, parents the other, detached. Whereas now it's coming a lot closer together and explaining what we're doing for their child at the end of the day, and why we're doing it. I think is the big thing as well. Yeah, okay, they're not going to rule us, go, oh no, you can't do this, this and this. As a club, we're going to have our ways in which we feel is right to develop players. That's why we're in the job we're in. But it's explaining it, and you're right. We also put in their education as part of the link. So you'll have the club, you have the family and the player, but also you'll have education, school. There's a massive connection and linking those together. Player may not be overly academically bright or interested in school, but we need to show them that importance, because yeah, we'd love all of our academy players to be professional footballers playing there. Unfortunately, that isn't what happens. So they have to understand that there's life away from football as well, and explaining that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, life unfortunately is life. It's a tough lesson, but at the same time, these workshops, are they being passed from the FA, the governing body, or is that an Aston Villa thing? And how are those workshops being delivered? Is it in person? Is it online?
Yeah, they'll be encouraged by the Premier League, but then it's down to each club on how they want to run them and deliver them. We'll deliver them in club, by coaches sometimes. It may be an external presenter come in. So one of the workshops that we'll do is on social media. We have a social media lawyer that looks after all the top players in the country, who works for Aston Villa as well. And he'll work for a number of clubs. He'll come in and talk to the risks of social media for players, as one of the workshops. It may be that one of the examples we did, so I was taking the under-13 coaching session, working with the players, whereas usually the parents will be stood the other side of the fence, watching onto the AstroTurf and watching the session. The lead phase, he brought the parents onto the pitch, next to the session, around it, but also spoke through why I was doing what I was doing and when I was doing it. So the parents aren't just looking, oh, I wondered why you did that then. And it was explaining it that way. So walking them around and going, okay, so he's going to go into a phase of play session now. So he'll open out into this. The idea is that he wants to get playing out from the back. So his main focus will be starting from the goalkeeper and working up, and there might be target goals just over the halfway line. But it's then understanding that actually okay, I might be a central midfielder, but I'm not the key focus in that particular session for that one. Okay, you may be on a rotation, but it's them understanding that within our themes, players will be the star of the role such at different times throughout the training weeks.
Fantastic. Well, I've got again, I don't want to take up your time, and you've been fantastic, Tom. I've really, we don't get obviously to talk enough. I mean, the last time I seen you in proper was a few years ago. So
Yeah,
this downtime and this lockdown, these new times that we have right now has been an absolute positivity in terms of connecting with people and really getting to learn and have a chit chat again. Why don't you just for until any other questions come in, well, this will be my last one, but why don't you give like a hierarchy of a per team within a coaching establishment, or the staffing? Is it the lead is going to be the top, and then it goes down to different coaches below that, or what within a phase? Can you give like a hierarchy of the coaches that are in that phase?
yeah. So if I take probably the phase that I've been in, so we've run it in a number of ways. So you'll have a lead phase. Now, by EPPP guidelines, you have to have a lead phase, depending on which category. So if you're at category 1, you must have a lead phase. You then must have an assistant lead phase. So you've got to have 2 full-time staff for a category 1 foundation youth development phase, as well as your professional development phase. We now run a model where you've got a full-time coach at each age group. That's to help with stuff you spoke earlier about communication, actually full tracking, that it's somebody's full-time job to know everything about the player's development and liaise with parents. So within our youth development phase, you've got the lead phase, and then you've got the age group coaches. Some clubs will work in cells, so they might cell together the 15s and 16s and have somebody that leads that. You'll have somebody maybe lead the 13s and 14s, and then some clubs now will introduce a transition phase. So from under 11s to under 12s, as I mentioned earlier about them leaving primary school, going to senior school, transitioning from 9-a-side football to 11-a-side football, and you may get somebody that looks after that. Your lead will be obviously at the top in terms of a hierarchy. They may report into the head of coaching. Some clubs are now changing where they'll have a technical player, head of technical player development, which is another role. So you'll have a head of coach development, and you'll have a head of technical player development as well, and they'll report into the academy manager. Both one with a focus on obviously developing the coaches, because now you've got such a big workforce where they'll go out and do FA courses, as you mentioned, but also actually what else can we do? So is it study visits? So this time last year I was over at Chicago Fire and spent a week with them, because my head of coaching had helped me arrange it and thought, well, actually that's what he needs for part of his development. So that's where they were reporting to, really.
Well, good. Now I did have a question that popped up here. So we had talked a little bit before coming on, but you know, in the terms of Aston Villa, they've obviously been you know, the last couple of years they've been trying to fight to get back in the Premier League. They're finally back in the Premier League. Who knows what's going to happen right now with the way the league's going to finish? But throughout your time at Villa, you've seen some different academy directors, academy managers, academy directors. I think you call them directors, right?
Director, then
a manager underneath, right? So the curriculum that you follow is, I'm guessing, from foundation phase. You haven't got transition, but some clubs have got transition through to your youth development phase and to your professional phase. What is the curriculum there, and how is that governed, and how is that created? Is it something that's changing between the academy directors that come in, or just can you give us a little bit of, and you know, we're not looking for the.
Yeah, no. So my first academy manager director at the time, he had a different, you had a clear philosophy in terms of it'd be a 4-4-2, attacking with width, crosses into the box, and you knew that as a philosophy. We then moved into a philosophy where we wanted players who could carry the ball. So you Jack Grealish kind of starts making sure that sort of edge of your seat. And now we're just in a process now with a new academy manager who's just come in, he's got his way in which he wants to see us play, but he's putting a lot of ownership to the coaches. So this time period now, we're on there designing what the technical program's going to be, what are the main core skills we want to see, what are the themes of the weeks that we're going to do, and how the position specific program looks. So we're having a real ownership now. Yeah, the academy manager is going to have his saying, go, this is what it's going to be, but the coaches and everybody's having a real input into how it actually looks and feels, which has been good. He's not just come in and gone, giving you a book and gone, there you go, that's it. We are being able to add parts to it as well.
That's an interesting, and probably it could be a topic for a whole another webinar just on the coaching process and the curriculum that's put in. So most of that curriculum then, once a change has happened, that's implemented to your coaches through online, through workshops, through just a vision, just a mission on how you're going to play, and then you design that periodization, or I guess that macro, micro, meso cycling, or
yeah. So it's been through workshops, a lot of it. So we had a really good one just after Christmas where instead of us having the players in and we've had sessions where we have players in and we'll the academy manager or head of coaching might put the session on, go, these are the kind of things we're looking for. But we also did it as staff. So we did a recent one where we coached our peers and you played in the games that we were trying to implement and some of the sessions. So actually you realise what the returns are of the practice, which was a fun way of doing it. And it probably brought the staff a little closer together as well, because you were playing and yeah, you're trying to remember that there is a development while you're there, but you get into the sessions as well and you don't want to be players again as such. So that's the way in which we're going through it now. And then there'll be meetings in classrooms. We may look at footage or documents and just make sure we've got an understanding so we can help the player to develop and understand it.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell just with the change from you talking post EPP to when you were before it, how much now has really gone into it, and the designing and the thought process, and I think that really bodes well for what's coming outside. I will promise you this is my last question. You were talking about 6-a-side earlier. You went 9v9 and then 11v11, but you did mention something about 6-a-side format. What's the format currently that is suggested from foundation phase through, even younger than foundation, I guess? But
the Premier League will set out some guidelines in terms of what they want to see. So under 9, 7-a-side, maybe 6-a-side, depending on the number of players. So if you've only registered 12 players at under 9s, okay, you might play 1 7-a-side on the weekend. You may go to the opposite club. Can we play 2 6-a-sides? Manchester United traditionally have always wanted to play 4-a-side at under 9s in the past whenever we've gone there, because that's what they believe in. So under 9s, you'd be going, then we're doing 4-a-side, we're going to Manchester. That's their belief. So if you're the home club almost, each week you can almost, but some weeks you'll be like, oh, well, we're going by the Premier League guideline. It says a minimum of 6-side for under 9s. There's then that area at 12s where is it 9? Should it be 9-a-side or 11-a-side? Our preference as a club is 11-a-side at the minute. That isn't to say that it won't become 9-a-side, but there may be weeks where you do play a 9-a-side because it may be player availability. You may have some injuries or players away and you end up playing a 9-a-side. You'll also be offered to play 9-a-side tournaments. At under 13, we've played in 9-a-side tournaments as well. I go back to the bit earlier for me when I was leading the foundation phase. I wanted to offer the players a variety in their curriculum in what they were playing. So yeah, they would do some 5-a-side maybe at futsal, some 6-a-side tournaments. They might get the 4v4 at Manchester United as long as we're going to play a 6v6 or a 7v7 on the same day with them. And then your big question was, okay, we're going to go from under 11s to under 12s, and we never see these boys in an opportunity to play 11-a-side football. So after Christmas in the under 11 year, a few years back, we introduced doing a couple of Friday night 11v11 games against the local district side, and just seeing how players found that and just starting to drip feed in that transition to 11-a-side football. And again, it'll go down to club preferences on what you believe. If I went and worked at another club tomorrow and they go, no, we staunch believe that it's 9-a-side football at under 12. Okay, great. When we play at home, we'll say to the travelling club, we're going to play 9v9. When we go away and they say 11v11, we'll try and get 9v9, but you're going to play 11v11 9 times out of 10.
Gotcha. That's some interesting stuff. I mean, just to give you kind of a highlight, it's changed somewhat since you were over here. 4v4, is up to U8, 7v7 to U10, 9v9 to U12, and then 11v11 over there. But then we have what's called development ages, where we can play up. So let's say there's a U8 team that's doing, the 4v4, they got more players, then we can play up to a U9 division group and play that 7v7. Or if we're at U12 and we're in the spring season, we're getting ready for 11v11, then we can do an 11v11 league that's like called a development league. We either play up or we're with our own age group, but we're at least getting to have a couple of players on there. So I think there's a lot of resistance to the small-sided games format when we first changed over, but now people are thinking, gosh, how do we have 11 players on the field when we're U8, which was ridiculous. But
Yeah.
it's definitely if you could run fast, you were going to score goals, that's for sure, because you'd have like 58 chances. Well, anyway, it's been absolutely fantastic. We've got I did have a couple other questions on there, but we'll skip those if we need to. One of them was about bio-banding.
Yeah.
Is that something you employ as a training method or a training, change things up a little bit?
So probably one of the first we started to hear that over here was with Southampton trying it. I think they did something with Bournemouth as well. And we took part in one of the first Premier League bio-banding tournaments down at Southampton. In that, it isn't something that I have seen too much more of that clubs have been doing. I think you're right. As a club, we feel if a player needed to play up and they were ready and right and all the circumstances right, they would play up. Likewise, if we felt that a player may be struggling physically, we would have and this is a term that somebody mentioned the other day. I was watching a webinar and they talk about playing across, not playing up and down. So if you're in a youth development phase and you talk about under 12, 13 and 14 and you see it as a cross, because our Sunday's games program isn't competitive in terms of it being a league. Now, there will be some competitions that won't allow you to play a player down. But for example, if we were going to go and play Arsenal this Sunday, we'd just let them know, look, we've got a boy who's going to be playing across into the under 12s now. He's in under 13. We've not put that player in that group because we want to go and beat Arsenal on Sunday. That isn't that. You may do it with goalkeepers also. If you've got 3 goalkeepers in one age group and you're playing a 75-minute game, you may move one up, or one across to the 14s and one across to the 12s and one in the 13s. And it isn't because you want to go and win. There aren't points. So it's purely about the players' development and what's right for them. But also, as well as the technical, tactical side, you've got to be wary of the psychological side. So you may have a player who you think, right, okay, let's move him up or across, sorry, should I say up? I talk to 14s for numbers wise. And you go, no. But psychologically, socially, he may not be ready to go into that year-older dressing room. Likewise, a player who you go maybe physically behind within his group and everything like that, he may feel embarrassed by going to have to play with the 12s because of his own peers. But I think if you can explain it and the players know that, so if you're doing it with an under 13, they know they've got a 2-year period at the club to develop. You hear many players who will talk about are late developers. And if you can show that patience and you see that there's a footballer there and they're technically right, and you can wait as long as we've been a club traditionally who have waited and been very patient on players up until like 18, 19 years, and then it's obviously down to your first team managers from there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic answer. Quickly before we go, an hour distance, how many clubs are within an hour for you? An hour of your area, how many clubs roughly? Just a quick number.
Oh, so I would have to count, so I don't want to miss. So you've got KV1, you've got Villa, you've got Wolves, you've got West Bromwich Albion, straight within the Midlands. Then you've got Birmingham City, Category 2 club, but a very good club at recruiting players in the Midlands, obviously big club in the Midlands as well. You've got Walsall, Coventry, I'm missing probably a couple within there as well. I don't Warsaw that I don't mean to, but
we're not looking to miss anybody out. My point was to the people that are listening, you're talking about an hour travel time, and we're talking about recruitment sometimes over here of where people are. I spoke to Liverpool only last week for Roscoe. Look at they got an ocean one side of them. An hour is going to be Northern Ireland or the middle of the ocean of the Irish box. So I think that's also an important part for people to understand. In England, apart from where I come from, like I told you at the beginning of it, Yeovil, Plymouth, Exeter was pretty much it, and nothing in Cornwall. Whereas where you're at, you just rattled off half a dozen,
Yeah.
4 category ones right off the bat. So it's important for people to realise, and maybe that's the time for another chat. What is it that entices players to come to join you? Is it because they're a love for Villa? Sometimes, maybe not, right? And then is it because the coaching staff? Is it because of the production? Is it a chance to go to first team? So I think there's all of those that we've not talked about with inside the EPPP that I just wanted to give a taster to some of those people that are listening to have a bit of a thought process about it as well. And I'm sure
Yeah.
down the road we can have you back on again and maybe
Great. Yeah.
the coaching process and how we get those players in. But for right now, I've absolutely taken far too much of your time. Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure in having a chat with you and
Thank you.
listening to what you've done. You come a long way, and I really, Joe speaks highly of you, extremely high of you.
Right.
So it's always good to be around and to listen to some of those things. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And thank you to those that have been listening. We appreciate you.
Cheers. Look after yourselves. Keep safe.